Well, hey everyone, thank you for joining us and being a part of our discussion as we come back for another addictions conversation, community and addictions, and really enjoying that. Today we're joined by Chris. So Chris, go ahead and
My name's Chris, and yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long have you been clean, Chris?
I've been sober for about 885 days.
Nice. You got it down to the day.
That is
Good
that
for
is
you.
that is
Yep.
awesome.
Yeah. What was your choice of drug?
Kind of whatever you got, but mostly alcohol and a lot of harder drugs too, especially toward the end. But at the end of the day, a lot of pot, but whatever you got that
Right.
if it changed my mental perspective very very quickly, I'll do it.
Yeah, I think most of us who are addicts are kind of that garbage. Whatever we can get high on is where we go.
Yeah.
So
Well, I like how you brought it up. Anything to change that mental state. Anything that's like I don't want to be in this mindset anymore, and whatever I can take to alter that.
Yeah.
That's huge because I think sometimes we're like, oh, we want the euphoric, or we want this, or we want that, and we kind of we think people are choosing a particular direction when a lot of times it's no, I just don't want to be on this old way of thinking.
Yeah.
And I think that is really good.
well, glad to have you here, Chris.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's great to be here, guys. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. So a question that we had, that we've kind of, I've witnessed in the community, I've seen some people do that, and I'm sure we might have noticed it in your own lives, is this idea of the trade-off for either an addict who is using currently or even one in recovery. There's this idea of a trade-off of obsession. Um, and this is my perspective, so correct me if I need to be, or maybe even give me some of your insights on this, but this idea that whether to fill the time or try to replace the time is, yeah, I think replace the time sounds a little better. Replacing the time using, like there's a trade-off where you get into a new obsession, and we can maybe even maybe we don't even recognize that we're treating that new obsession as like we would the addiction. um, or we don't recognize that that's occurring. We just are feeling it. I don't know if that makes sense. A little foggy this morning myself.
Right. No, I get what you're saying. First of all, for me, I would have to say that addiction is definitely an obsession.
Mm-hmm.
And it tends to feel uncontrollable.
Mm-hmm.
When especially when you're using, because you don't have that. Because you're using, your brain is in a fog,
Yeah.
and so you don't have the ability to recognize those kinds of things or to control it, because it's just, now in recovery it's a little different. I feel like, so like I was saying before, like I went from 24/7 getting high to working just an obnoxious amount of hours.
Your 24/7 high turned into your 24/7 on the job.
Right. And and it wasn't even something that I thought about,
Mm-hmm.
but at a certain point it started to get pointed out to me, like, hey, this is too much. This is, and I realized that my obsession from drugs turned into my obsession for making money.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be unhealthy, and it really got to a point where it was kind of unhealthy because I had no kind of life beyond just that. And it was, when you work that much, you don't even get time to enjoy what you're making.
Right.
Kind of thing, So did I see it as an obsession or a replacement? Not at first,
Right.
But once I recognized it, which is the beauty of being in recovery, is you can actually start to recognize some of your behaviors.
Yeah.
I was able to address it, and in obsession and recovery is not the same as obsession while in addiction,
Right.
because you can address it
Mm-hmm.
and start to change it. it still feels like somewhat of a withdrawal from it,
Yeah.
which is kind of weird, you know, because it's like, why am I withdrawing from not being at work? You
Well,
know,
well, even like, and I like the idea of using work as an example because I mean that's kind of like a universal occupation. Like how many of us we're all gonna go? We have jobs we got to do. We have something we got to be involved in, and even like home projects can be quote unquote work. A very familiar term for many of us is the term workaholic,
right.
which I think is a really active, not active, accurate, a very accurate descriptive of that obsession where that replacement obsession becomes the active obsession.
Yeah.
You know.
Right. Well, and you know, it's not just even that. Like I've had where if you've ever been to my house, which most people have not, but I've had it where auctions and antiquing and things like that became an obsession too.
Yeah.
You know, and not that it's an unhealthy obsession, because I'm not saying that every time you go out and you are actively being, I don't know what it's almost like an addiction,
Mm-hmm.
you know, or can be, you know, is it always unhealthy? You know, I don't know that for sure, but when it starts to really affect your life in a negative way, that's when you have to really
Right.
kind of take a look at things.
Yeah.
You know, and that's not always easy to see.
No.
You know, even in you know, in recovery,
Yeah.
you know, you still find yourself having these, you know, like for some people it's gambling, going to the casino,
Right.
you know what I mean? You know, or whatever it may be. You know, some people get into this health thing where they're running and exercising, and that becomes an obsession for them. You
Yeah.
know, I don't know. Have you experienced that?
So I go in waves because I have some what we would say in programs outside issues.
Mhm.
I have a lot of mental health stuff going on, and that came actually more clear when I got sober. Mental health, because then it's like there's no mask anymore.
Right.
So
That's good stuff.
So I'm actually kind of so I threw myself into music for a while. I've kind of messed around with music most of my life. And part of what I'm actually dealing with right now is the lack of having an obsession. So kind of almost on the polar opposite.
Okay.
Which in its own way is it's it's a little difficult because I'm at a point where it's actually been really hard for me to focus on anything.
Okay.
So I kind of almost wish I had an obsession right now but yeah, man, yeah, I'm looking for my obsession to kind of take away from it. But the thing is with an addict brain, when I don't have a way to keep my brain occupied, it just goes
Mhm.
and it goes and it goes and it goes. And with some outside issues, it kind of leaves me to freeze and get really, really panicky.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm waiting. Like I was really obsessed with music when I first got sober. I make like music on my laptop, so I would just go for like 6 8 hours. But sometime about, as we say, the pink cloud, which is kind of like the high of being sober.
Mhm.
Usually it's in like the first few months for a lot of people, at least it was for me. I once that kind of started subsiding, like the real world started hitting,
Yeah.
and
The honeymoon was over.
yeah, that's a great way of putting it. The honeymoon was over. I started losing that obsession, and you know, there's some days I will say that whatever I do, um, I'm in it, if
Mhm.
that makes sense. Where if I'm gonna start working out, then I really, really start working out. But then my problem right now has been consistency.
Mhm.
So for me, it's you know, I'm sober, I'm grateful, but yeah, I just in the last since I moved from San Diego in February, I've kind of just been like, man, I don't know what to do with my time. You know?
See, that kind of makes sense to me, you know, because uh, one of the problems that I have had as an addict is really kind of dealing with life,
Mhm.
you know, simply because I've stayed high the whole time, so I didn't really, you know, so when you come out of that, I had never really thought about it, but I needed to still have some kind of avoidance
Mhm.
in my life so that I didn't have to deal with some of that stuff. and that's where those obsessive behaviors come into play.
Right.
So if you're on the opposite of it and you're not actually having those obsessive behaviors, I could see where it would be you, because then you're forced
Yep.
in a way to just deal with what's going on upstairs
Yep.
and just in life in general. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's, I mean, maybe that's a coping mechanism. I never really thought about that, is that we can't just, be like, okay, let's just deal with all this. We have to have some sort of distraction,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
so that we don't have to deal with it all at once. And so that's why it's called that.
Well, and even this, like for myself, like I do have an obsessive personality myself. Like there are things where I'm like this
Yes,
is
you do.
I do. I do. I have some really awkward, yeah. But what's fascinating about that is like even like just with life in general, sometimes it can get so overwhelming at times that with ministry, even that, like, in order for me to just sit and process and even just to relax, I have to have an outside obsession, something outside that just, my wife will look at me and she goes, you're obsessed with Legos.
Oh, nice.
I am a Lego fanatic,
Right.
and I mean Star Wars Legos particularly.
That's
Yeah.
better.
It is. It's
I actually
that's-
have some. Maybe you might want.
Oh yeah, let me know. I mean, see, there we go. Now see, we're cooling my own obsession. But it is true, because we have to have that coping. There's those things where, like, there's some days where it's like the idea of, just the idea of like how much we've carried that day, and so we carry so much that day, so that when we finally get a moment to just sit down, we need to decompress.
Right.
We need to process. We just need to, like, breathe, essentially, but we have to do it in a direction.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, like, for me, and I can't speak to everyone else, but for me, one of the most therapeutic things for me to do is to open up a box of Legos, sit down, and just build.
Right.
And just have that moment. And, like, it's like I'm a young 39. I got 3 kids, and I'm the one on the floor with all the Legos out there, just putting it all together.
Nice.
Just because it helps, that, or I pick up a novel and I start reading, but something to kind of just
See, and that seems like a normal reaction. Now you get into an addict mind, and we overdo it.
yeah.
So instead of just opening one package, we'd be there for 14 hours.
You got your 10, and you're
Yeah.
So we can completely. Well, for me, I hate speaking about everybody, but for me, like, I go into complete obsessive mode, and it becomes unhealthy, in a way where it takes away from my daily grind, the people in my life, everybody else starts to get isolated because I'm just here, and so there's a happy medium there, and probably what you're talking about is probably a happy medium where it's like, okay, I need to decompress, and I need to I need to do something to kind of distract my mind, whereas I'm more like, I need to avoid, so I just am gonna all out and completely try to get away from it.
I could see if I got into Legos, I would be buying one of those like 3,000 just insane castles. Like, I can't see, like, just the idea of getting into like Legos, or I was really into Kid Connects as a kid or whatever. Yeah, I mean, if that was my vice, just something like Legos or any other hobby, back to music, especially in the beginning, buying stuff that I really, like, oh, hey, by the way, sweetie, I know I didn't ask, but I got this piece of music software that I couldn't afford.
Yeah.
Realistically. And, this, just like, no, I've had to talk myself down, so many times of like, oh, hey, dude, you do not need this $500 piece of software.
Yeah.
And I have I've had my credit card information filled out and my mouse on the pay. I've bought stuff, and then at like 2 a.m. frantically been like asking for refunds. Luckily, I got them because that avoided a really stern conversation with my wife.
True. Yeah.
So it's when I lock into an obsession, it's a feeling I can, especially with like drugs, it's a feeling that I can literally feel behind my eyes.
Yeah.
Like it's a physical manifestation. I feel it in my chest and I feel it behind my eyes. And it's the same of like to looking to score. It's that same kind of like mentality
That euphoria you
that
get
euphoria.
from it.
That's a great
no
way
matter
to
what
put
it is, you get that.
Well,
that push.
Like,
Well, people
Yeah.
who
yeah.
people get that. For people who are actually diagnosed, again, not doctors, not no training as a counselor. Like I don't have the professional stuff, but that idea of that the people who that obsessive compulsive disorder, when people get that idea of like, you know, I cannot come down unless I tap so many times.
Right.
You know, I can't go on a light unless I check on the light how many times. You know, I have to say this so many times. I have to move the mouse this many times. I have to, you know, do these things so that I'm at rest.
Right.
Right. That, and using that euphoric mentality. The pressure's there. I cannot. I've got to do something. If that makes any sense. I mean, for people who are diagnosed that way, that's a very real diagnosis. But as like for, and again, not an expert, but just what I'm picking up, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is that for the addict mindset is there's that unrest, real pressure. I need that release, and so I'm going to do this until I can get that relaxed sensation. I don't know if that's is that right or wrong.
That sounds. I mean, yeah. I'm. Excuse me.
It's allergy season. The air is dry.
Yep.
And we have the wildfire smoke from Canada too.
So, for an addict, yeah, maybe I better take a drink of this.
Yeah, there you go.
For me, as an addict, the obsession wasn't necessarily the drug
Mm-hmm.
or the activity. It was the changing what was going on upstairs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, not necessarily forgetting, but that getting high
Yeah.
feeling, the euphoria of it.
Yeah.
And so when you get involved in other things in recovery, and it causes that euphoria for you, because you know when you're doing some things, it makes you feel good.
Right.
You know, so my problem is that I start to chase those kinds of things because that's kind of built into me, I guess. I don't know, where I start to chase those little highs, you know, like, well, this felt really good, you know. And so for me, like I was talking about, like with the antiques and the toys and stuff like that, you know, it was it started because I bought this box of things, you know, and I discovered that one of them that I got in there for $5 turned out to be worth about $1,000.
Yeah.
It was like, oh my God, you know, and that set me off and kind of running on it, you know. And like I said, anybody who knows me and has been to my place is like, yeah, you're out of control.
Yeah.
Excuse my language.
Yeah, thank you.
You know, because I got just a ton of toys everywhere. I got all kinds of different collections, you know, and and it all started because of that one moment where it was like, you know, and it kind of went from there, you know. And so just to kind of bring you into an addict's mind a little bit is that, you know, that anything that makes me feel good can become a problem for me.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, because that was the ultimate chase in all of it, in my addiction with drugs. You know, it was all about feeling good and feeling, you know, because I mean, ultimately that's the goal, right? Let's get high, you know. And you can get high on just about anything, you know,
right.
especially when when something.
Yeah, what's the engaging the pleasure receptors of the brain? It's the engaging of what makes me feel good. What makes me feel
Dopamine. I mean,
yeah,
I'm constantly chasing dopamine, and what you were talking about brought up. Speaking of something that should be healthy and good for you, I knew this guy years ago when I first went into treatment. He got addicted to running.
Oh yeah.
When I mean addicted to running, I mean he started running half marathons every single day, if not a little bit more. His podiatrist was like, "You need to stop."
Yeah.
And he just still kept doing it because of the endorphin rush that he would get when he hits that runner's high.
Yeah.
So for him, it wasn't enough just to like do a jog and feel like, okay, I feel good.
Right.
Like, this is a good day. I'm gonna, I started off right. I'm healthy. No, he ran himself to being unhealthy.
Yeah.
So that's kind of still showing that like addictive mind where you can take something, perfectly healthy for you and do it to the point where you're, hurting yourself.
Well, that's like the idea of like, there's a lot of, well, in the Bible, Paul writes in one of the letters, he says, all things are permissible, but not all things are beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that idea of like, we can get into a lot of things, but there's a level where sometimes even good things are not healthy anymore. They're not like, there's a line where we joke about, and I say joke because I take it very lightly. My own obsession with Legos, which is, hey, I buy 1 or 2 sets a year, if that, right, versus buying 3 sets a day. That
Which sounds more like an addict.
That sounds more like an, well, and that's where that obsession kicks in. That's where like it's not a bad thing, but look where the behavior switches from going to work and providing for your family to workaholic, right, where it switches, where hey, just there are medical cases where people have are drinking water, so I'm going to apologize for saying this, but there's medical cases where people have drank so much water that they've actually overflooded their whole systems with it, and causes substantial harm with the way they've been intaking water. Something healthy that becomes something unhealthy, and that's that mindset where we just the pleasure receptors are all there until we hit it so much that's like, okay, no, and it just grows, and that obsession just grows until it takes over.
And and in AA there's kind of a saying called the ism.
Mm-hmm.
You have, and it's just kind of a thrown around thing where you can take away the alcohol, but you still have the ism.
I like that.
Not my own idea.
It's really good.
So it kind of just shows what's left of, I can take away all the chemicals, but I'm still left with
yourself
and the ism and myself,
right.
And that's for me as an addict, one of the scariest things I can have, and it doesn't, when I say it doesn't seem like a big deal, but for a lot of, well, for myself rather, being alone in my own head, that is being alone in between here, that's a very scary spot to be if I'm not doing what I need to do in my program or what have you. So when I'm alone in my head, that's when the isms kick in, and a lot of the times, in order to alcoholic, addict, whatever, not having something to replace that, and that's where I'm at personally. Is like I was saying earlier, I haven't found my new obsession yet, but when I do, it's gonna be all off the rails, because I still have that ism, that addict, and it's gonna be a kind of a journey for the rest of my life to find out what that's gonna be. Right now, I'm actually really getting into meditating, and I'm not saying meditating like, I'm, now that I think about it, I am getting a new kind of I'm not meditating like once a day. I'm meditating like 5 or 6 times a day.
Okay.
Which is a great healthy habit. but it just still goes to show, like, most people probably, I don't want to speak for most people, but from what I've observed, it would be like, okay, this is a nice new healthy thing, but it's like, no, I have to do it constantly, and if I don't do it when I think I was going to, well then, that's again when like the mental gymnastics can start.
Yeah.
I'm still waking up, so my articulation
Yeah.
isn't the best here, but I
Well,
think you get what I'm saying.
Here's
Yeah.
the thing, the benefit of being in a program and recovery is that um, they have answers because they've all been through it, and they can people will observe some of the things that you're doing, and they will, I don't want to say confront you, but they
Right.
will address it, and be like, hey, is this getting to be too much? And that's why we go to like meetings, because then we can talk about those things,
Right.
and then it can be brought to us of like, hey, this is what I had to do, so I'm not saying that, for the rest of our lives we're going to be on this freaking
Yeah.
obsession high, but it can cause problems, but we also do have solutions to that, and that's one of the beauties of being in the programs is because people have been through it,
Yeah.
and so they can be like, hey, like someone who's got 20 years can be like, I had this kind of problem too, and this is what I did.
Yeah.
And so then what we do is we either decide we're going to be like, okay, let's try this way, or we're just going to ignore it and continue on our obsession. And then eventually down the road, there's a crash,
You were
some
right.
sort of crash, where maybe mentally or physically you just kind of crash.
Yeah.
And that's when you're like, okay, I got to try something different, because you do have a healthy state of mind, as much as you can,
Right.
and so you're able to think through that a little bit.
Yeah.
Obsession is kind of a strange thing, because you would think that you can control it,
Right.
like, why does somebody, like, for me, I'd be like, why would you get obsessed with Legos,
Right.
right? But that's not for me to just, so it's hard for me to understand why that would happen. But then here I am over here buying a bunch of toys,
Right.
and it, there was a time when it was financially a little bit straining on me,
Right.
but I kept doing it, why? I don't know. It just was,
Right.
it wasn't a thought process where I was like, oh my God, I'm just gonna, put myself in all kinds of situations just so I could get this. It just kind of naturally occurred for me because I'm obsessive, compulsive.
Yeah.
As an addict, I'm working on minimizing that, and I think that the key to minimizing that is really starting to get to know yourself and understand yourself a little better.
Well, and that's the thing that's been really key, because that's where I'm at, my process, my thinking is right now, is the idea of, you're learning how to operate with yourself. You're learning how to, how navigating your own head, essentially. You're learning how to navigate your own head. You're learning, okay, this is how I deal with things. This is where I gravitate towards. This is when subject A comes at me, whatever that A may be for you, when this situation arises for me, my natural response is to go into response B. So subject A hits me, I go into response B, and then the result is C. And that's just the natural flow. And so learning how to process that path, and how to think, how to deal, how to journey through your own head, and processing these things, and learning how, and then this is gonna really cliche, but learning how to live with yourself in a way, where you're going to, and then the benefit, with the recovery community, the benefit with a community at large, is that there are, I'm gonna say, options of accountability. That idea of, somebody just says, hey, I recognize that you're doing this. Here's how I've processed this. Here's how I've learned to deal with this mess. Hey, oh, you're struggling with a depression right now with whatever hit you. Okay, here's what's helped me come out of that depression. When I would find myself, like, what caused the depression, that's a whole separate thing. But here's how I've learned how to walk through it. And you share your testimony. You share the accountability one shares to the person who's on the journey and says, hey, it's like driving to the church. It's like, hey, I'm going down Highway 65. And, how can I not miss the building? Well, I found the best way is to turn off right here at this particular street. Make that turn right there, and you won't miss it. Right?
Right.
But if you've never done that before, if someone's never told you how to make that turn, it's very easy to miss.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of the program is sorry, sometimes I get caught up in my own words, but
it's early.
For me at least, I didn't sleep that well. I need that director.
Mm-hmm.
I need that person sitting in the seat.
Yeah.
I've tried it without getting any navigation, without having a navigator. It doesn't work. I spent a long time figuring
by
it
the
out.
way, is called a sponsor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, accountability partner.
Yeah.
We're using for the viewer. We're using a lot of terms very interchangeably right now.
Right.
When we say accountability partner, navigator, director, sponsor, that person who's going to help you through the process.
Yeah, and the fellowship. But a sponsor for me is we have the 12 steps and everything, and the point, having somebody to navigate me through the steps, and someone who, like my sponsor, I know is about to get on me for not working on my 9th step, which is making amends. And someone to, like, they're not my friend, they're not my dad, they're someone to help me stay accountable.
Yeah.
And also help me work through the steps. And then where the fellowship is important, I get a lot of navigation from the fellowship too, just talking to people, right, and being honest with people. Because that's a new thing for me, is being honest. Because how can I get honest feedback if I'm not honest with other people?
Right. Yeah.
That's something we've actually talked a lot about. Is that honesty has to be the forefront of everything else.
Well,
so
and I love how I mentioned, like, when they come in, like, I'm not your friend. And I say this kind of tongue in cheek as well, is because, as a minister, as a pastor, I've had other mentors and pastors who they taught me how to do this. They showed me how to do this, right? So this whole process of learning how to live this life and learning how to be this individual. And I had one mentor, I still have. He's a great mentor. I still call him all the time. First time after he hired me, I served as a youth pastor in their church. And one of the first conversations we had after he brought me on staff was, I'm not your friend. I was like, this is a great guy. I'm going to serve with him in the church. And he's like, I'm not your friend. I'm your pastor.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of, that boundary of, I'm this to you. I'm not this. And that can seem a little harsh at times. It can seem a little cold. But you almost need that very much. You need that boundary, because somebody who's mentoring, accountability, director, navigator, they kind of have a friend almost has to be kind. The expectation is, friends don't hurt me, right? Well, that sponsor, that director, that accountability person, they've got to be able to come up there and be like, I'm going to say something to you that's going to be hurtful.
Yep. And my sponsor told me right off the beginning, he's like, I don't care about you. He's like, I care about your sobriety.
Right.
And that kind of, you were talking about setting a boundary. And luckily, when I have an awesome sponsor, I have an awesome network.
Mm-hmm.
That when I do start feeling the obsession coming back in, that's why it's so important. I have made some really good friends here in the short time that I've been here in this community.
Awesome.
And yeah, it's a really welcoming community. Where it's like this obsession is kicking in, and I have people that will make me laugh, and then I have also people that will be dead serious, be like, hey, like, this is, you can can die, dude. You
Yeah.
know, if you go back down that road. So yeah, like just having, I can't stress, you know, having a social network and having, you know, this finding a sponsor for me, that was a big deal. But that I have a very obsessive brain,
Mm-hmm.
and I need, not want, but I need people in my life that I can bounce it off. Like, where is this coming from?
Right.
Because a lot of it, it's physical too. Like when the body is tight, the brain's tight, and vice versa. You know, and like just having someone to like, hey man, take a breath.
Right.
Like it's so cliche, but it's really impossible for the brain to relax if the body doesn't have enough oxygen. I have a friend of mine that tells me just that. Okay, I get it, man. I hear you. When's the last time you just took a breath?
Yeah.
You know, when's the last time you just like shrugged your shoulders around and like kind of like that mindfulness kind of thing?
Mm-hmm. Well, that slowing down,
Slowing down,
becoming that slowing down, becoming self-aware.
Yeah.
Just that pause that just kind of reminds us, you know, the world hasn't ended yet.
Yes.
Because definitely the world is always ending in our minds.
Oh,
well,
yeah.
Well, I like the idea of what he.
And
was,
I've been there, by the way.
Right. I like the idea of what he was saying and how that would pertain to the community that we tend to try and address or speak to.
We want the community to recognize what we deal with.
What he's saying is that the community around him is really kind of what keeps him from becoming that obsessive addict mind. You know, obviously he has to be honest first, but
right.
You know, just because you're not in the program does not mean that you can't be that person also.
Right.
And it also doesn't mean like I understood what you're saying about, you know, they're like, well, we're not friends or whatever. That doesn't have to be the situation. My sponsor is actually one of my best friends.
They can become your friends.
Well, he's been a friend of mine for quite some time.
Yeah.
And even prior to my sponsorship. And so that can occur.
Yeah.
It's just that he has to be able to be honest too, you know, which means that he has to be able to look past the friendship and be more concerned about my life.
He there's moments when he can talk to you as a friend.
Right.
But then he has to reserve that outside moment where I'm going to talk to you as a sponsor this time.
Right. He has to understand what his job is as a sponsor is, you know, and so somebody who is not in the program, they have to understand that, yes, you can love the addict and you can be their best friend and you can be all that. But when it comes time to actually address the addiction, you have to have a firm, and you know, here's one of the things that happens a lot of times is that when you're in treatment, they tell you, you know, you have to set boundaries with people. You have to let them know, like, hey, if you see this or this, you know, you should confront me, you know. And the reason they do that is so that we don't play games with them, we don't manipulate them, you know. They know ahead of time, like, hey, if you see me twitching, you know, just for an example, it sounds stupid, but you know, you should confront me and say, hey, what's going on? Why are you twitching? What are you back? You know, you don't have to necessarily say, are you back on drugs? But you know, what can I do to help you get past this point?
Well, the beauty, like, it's not making that community connection, right? How, you know, taking this obsessive, because we're approaching an hour here real soon.
Are we really?
Yeah, this is a great conversation.
Was that not quick?
It was quick.
It's really quick. This is a fun one. But to kind of build that bridge between the conversation of obsession and then connecting it to the community, you know, on the community side of things, for the addict, for the run recovery, having them, you know, making sure that you are not isolated and rolling around in your own obsessive bubble. You know, because I'm phrasing it that way because the obsession can become anything.
Right.
Your obsessive bubble
can be carrots.
You get obsessed with gardening and we'll be worried. And I mean like vegetable garden, by the way. But when you're in that bubble, there's no. You're in the bubble. You can't recognize a way out. You're left to yourself. returning to old habits is excessively easy. But being surrounded by a healthy community, people who know you, who see you, who are there for you, um, that when you begin to navigate your mind, navigate your life, you learn how to live with yourself. Um, you have a community surrounding you that says, "Hey, this is great. We're here for you." And if they're watching, if they're paying attention, "Hey, we noticed that you did 70 hours at work this week. Are you okay?" You know, "Hey, we noticed that you're needing a lot of money because you're spending it over in this area. Are you okay?" You know, they're not calling you out, but they're asking the right question that says, "Hey, are we approaching where it's becoming unhealthy?"
Okay, so I agree completely with kind of what you're saying.
Yep.
But so first of all, an addict is not fragile.
Right.
Okay, so you know, I mean, we can
They
act like we're fragile, but
Right.
we're really not.
They can
Right.
the community can ask
So-
smarter questions.
So here's my thought process on what you just said.
Yeah.
Is that if let's say you're the addict, right?
Mhm.
And you're going back into that mode. Well, my mindset on the outside as the community needs to be that if he goes back to addiction, he's going to die. Do I
Right.
want him to die? No, I don't.
Right.
So I need to just be upfront. And if it's brutal, it's brutal.
Right.
You know what I mean? But I need to be able to point that out because, you know, I need to shake you up a little
Right.
bit because as an addict, if you coddle me a little bit, oh boy, I'm going to take full advantage of that.
Right.
You know, and we're going to expand that bubble until all of a sudden I'm back into active using and I'm on a path where all of a sudden, you know, who knows what
Right.
will happen. But, you know, so for the community, that's the whole point in why I've said many times that as a community we need to be healthy.
Right.
And the reason we need to be healthy is because we can't be so sensitive to am I going to hurt his feelings and send him
Right.
off on this little trip? No, you know, if he's going to go that route or she, whatever, they're going to go that route.
Yeah. If it's
But-
already pre-planned.
But you, as the individual outside of it, can state what you see.
Right.
You can definitely confront.
Right.
You know, if you care about that person and you don't want them to die,
Right.
then you need to speak up.
Right.
You know, whether you think it's going to help or not, if it's something that is concerning to you, it's okay.
Yeah.
You know, because first of all, you're in a healthy mind. You're not. It's not like you're doing it to be mean or to poke at the person or to bring them down. Your objective is to continue to help that person save their own life.
Right. Well,
If that makes any sense.
Yeah. Well, and the idea of like, you know, a healthy person watching the individual who, you know, you're walking with somebody who's in recovery, and you see a new obsession playing out. You know, hey,
Which can be dangerous.
this is this does not look healthy. You need to slow down. You know, hey, this is, you know.
And sometimes that's what you need is that
Yeah.
jolt.
Well, it's
To be like,
hey,
oh
this
yeah, I
is-
guess you know what? I never really was,
Yeah.
because we have a tendency to really kind of blindside ourselves.
Yeah.
Where we don't see some of the things that we're doing.
Yep.
Which sounds kind of. It's not that we don't know what we're doing. It's just that we get blindsided to the whole idea
The
that-
recognition's not there.
that this could be unhealthy, and so sometimes, you know, I just need to be smacked upside my head and be
Yeah.
like, hey, what the fuck are you excuse
Yeah.
me, what are you doing, you know? And then it's like, yeah, what am I doing, you know? And so it brings that thought to the front
Right.
of my process, and so then I can actually find a way to work through that. It may not be with the person who actually pointed it out,
Right.
but you know, I'll if I'm doing recovery the way that I should be, I will seek somebody out to address
Right.
that problem, you know, and you know, and like he said, I seek out different people for different things,
Yeah.
you know, not because I want to hear what I want to here,
Right.
but because I know that this person's gone through this or that person's gone through that, and so how did you get through this?
Well, we had a tree fall in my house over a month ago, and I'm not going to hire a landscaper
Right.
to do construction.
To do
Right.
the roof,
I'm not gonna hire a doctor when I need legal advice.
Right.
I'm not gonna, we go to the experts. We go to the people
Right.
who are knowledgeable in those fields in order to receive their instruction or to receive their insight.
Yeah.
And that's important.
The way that you find that out is you go to meetings, right?
Yeah.
And you speak to the people who are in those meetings, and you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So that's a good point for the community as well, is to understand that if they're not going to meetings, or if they're not actually taking the time to put into their recovery, that's probably a problem already.
Yeah.
Because that's where we get the good stuff.
Right.
You might, like, there are times when I don't want to go,
Right.
and I think, well, whatever, I'm gonna go anyhow just for the hell of it, and I walk away thinking, wow, I'm I needed that,
Yeah.
whether I knew it or not, and somebody spoke on something that that I needed to hear, because maybe even in the fact that I might feel like my recovery is just like all this and that,
Yep.
but there's still problems, and so when they touch on that, it's like, oh wow, I never really thought about that.
Yeah.
And so and that's how you grow in recovery, is you have to start out almost to the obsessive point
Mm-hmm.
of really hitting those meetings and really getting into the 12 steps and really getting a sponsor that you can speak to on a daily basis, because that's what they usually require at the beginning, is you have to call me every day.
Yeah.
You have to do this every day, and it's really, they do that so that you become habit forming, so even when you're not really thinking about it, you still do it.
Yeah.
And that's where you get those I don't need a doctor, I need a lawyer,
Right.
and you start to find out who your community is in the program,
Yeah.
so for the community outside of addiction, the people who are not addicted,
Right.
that's something to watch out for, and it's something to understand that if this person is really just hasn't been to a meeting in months, there's probably a problem.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know if it was you who said it, but it was sometime in the last couple of days, the opposite of addiction is connection.
That's
Yeah.
a Byron thing.
Is that a Byron
Yeah,
thing?
that's cool.
Which is, or wait, is it? I don't know. But
But
yeah,
that's just so true.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but I thought it was you. But that's what it all comes down to, is being alone in one's head, being alone in the obsession, like I was talking about
Yeah.
earlier, that like push pull isolating. Like for me, I almost feel like I'm in an iron mask kind of weird feeling.
Mm-hmm.
When I get connected, when I talk to my sponsor, when I talk to people in the program, there's something magical that happens.
Yeah.
breaks it down.
And I don't know what it is, but there's something just magical, beautiful, call it what you will. There's just something that just happens when I open up to somebody, when I share honestly, when I go to meetings, when I feel connected. I used to overthink this stuff a lot, and now I'm to the point in my program where I just don't care anymore.
Yeah.
If you tell me to jump 8 feet, well, I'm gonna try to go for 12. But
Yeah.
still,
That's awesome.
tell
Well,
me
the dump is important, to dump that stuff that weighs you down
Yeah,
and really gets you in those negative positions or whatever. When you dump something, it's more than just you being honest with somebody. It's you actually releasing a part of you
Yeah.
that you don't want.
Yeah.
And they can absorb it, and they're going to absorb it where it's not going to affect them.
yeah, that's
And
yeah,
which is kind of the dynamic of what you want in a sponsor, is somebody that you can dump to and they're just going to be like, oh yeah, I remember those feelings, I remember that. And it lessens that load that you carry around, because I know that for me personally, I had a lot on my shoulders because of the I want to say piece of garbage I was when I was using. I was really not a very good person at all. And so that really built that weight. Well, when I realized that the person that I'm talking to who went through addiction uh, also had a lot of that garbage, but was able to release it. How did he do it? Well, he did it the same way that I have to do it, which is to just release it, dump. You know what I mean? And I know that sounds kind of strange, but you like you said, all of a sudden it starts to break down them walls, and that mask and whatever else. It causes you to understand that that's not who you are, which is something I think I was talking about last night. Was it's not who I was, it's who I am.
Yeah.
And that's where I need to get to, is who am I?
Yeah.
And
there's two great passages in the Bible. So in Hebrews 10:24, it talks about, don't give up gathering together as some are in the habit of doing, but do so all the more to encourage one another. To paraphrase it,
that actually makes perfect sense.
And so that whole idea of like, humanity, we are created for relationship. We're created for connection. We're created to lean on each other, and that we are told to come together and to encourage one another. Right? We're told to come in to do that, to build us up and to move us and to do work in our lives. And then in the book of Revelation, there's a passage that says we overcome all kinds of junk, overcome all kinds of messes. It says we overcome by the word of our testimony, our stories, and by the blood of the Lamb. Talking about Jesus, talking about God. And so we overcome by the power of God and our stories. And that's the whole idea, like why the community is so big, why the recovery community itself, the programs, why those are so important, is because these are groups of people who are committed to coming together, sharing their stories, and saying that you're not alone in this. And they recognize that, and they say, it's the whole. I love the imagery of somebody who's drowning in a lake, and somebody shoots their hands in the water and says, I know this place, give me your hand, I'll pull you up. And they help you struggling to breathe, and they bring you out to that place where, hey, here's life. Here's how we do this. Right. I will teach you how to swim. It will not be easy. You will get water in your lungs. You will feel the stress of this. Like it's not easy, but it's possible with me. And that's why it's such an important part.
I think that kind of relates to the whole idea where they tell you if you want to be successful, hang out with people who are successful, right?
Yeah.
Because they'll bring you up,
You're picking up their disciplines,
right?
You're picking up their stuff that they do.
So in recovery, if I want to be successful in recovery, well, then why would I not be around people who have been successful in recovery?
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And it just makes total sense.
You really are the company you keep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. No, that is so key. We're going to wrap it up here, guys. So that is our time, but thank you so much for being a part of our discussion, and we hope to see you next time, and you guys have a great day. See you later.